No, I'm very open to saying I do.
Awesome. Right. Well, Kirsty Elliott, thank you very much for joining me. You are the world see from the industry perspective. You are the leader in women's biology of physiology of sporting female athletes. Can you give me 10 seconds on your career?
My goodness. Well, firstly, thank you. That was very sweet of you to say. 10 words about my career. I'm a sports scientist by trade. Very quickly started specializing in female physiology. So understanding sort of how women, how they respond to sport. And then I guess really specifically then getting into sort of hormonal profiles, endocrinology. So understanding things like how the menstrual cycle might affect women's potential to train or compete, and indeed wider than that, any sort of hormonal profile like pregnancy, hormonal contraceptive use, so anything specific to women. It was more
Perfect.
than 10
So,
words.
but all's good. So you kind of explain where this pod is going to go. We're just going to discuss women's sport, women, female athletes, and a quick way to start this would be really: is there do girls need to train differently to boys?
Top level answer, no. Um, no, they don't. Of course, there's nuance under there. And I guess let me do the pendulum swing first. So the answer is no, they can train the same. And the pendulum swing is no, they should do something entirely different and something possibly based on their menstrual cycle or whatever sort of hormonal profile they have. And that pendulum swing, that also isn't true. So there's somewhere in the middle where I think you can train girls and women in the same way. So if they're footballers, you can train them as footballers in the main. Good, train for the demands of your sport, fuel for the demands of your sport. But maybe there's some nuance then if, as women, as girls, they have a female specific consideration, and if that seems to be impactful to them. So, a quick example might be if they're somebody who gets a lot of negative symptoms, physical symptoms, or emotional symptoms associated with their menstrual cycle, then it would make sense to change their training on that particular day. But that's not something special. It's not special to women. It's called auto-regulation. It's a good coaching practice, right? It's coaching 101. If your player, if your athlete doesn't feel great, then adapt the training to suit that. So I'm very much there in the middle ground. If there's something that they need that's impacting them in a negative way, of course, change the training. That might be a female specific issue. It might not be. But no, I don't think we have to throw away all our good principles of sports science or coaching science and train girls and women entirely different than boys and men.
Brilliant. So the people that listen to this podcast are well aware of my views on these things, but I like to, with girls, with kids, with 75-year-olds, with golfers, with footballers. My feeling is that you have underpinning principles and then you
Mhm.
apply them to the individual. So
Absolutely.
does that sound about appropriate for this?
Absolutely. It really is. It speaks to the, those principles, as I say. We understand the demands of particular sports. We train to match those. And yeah, whoever's put in front of you, whether it's young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, yeah, there should be some adaptation. And some of those, as I say, may be driven by the fact that they're girls and women, but it's almost in some ways immaterial. You're just adapting what you're doing to the person in front of you. It's very simple. It's very pragmatic. It's good coaching. It's good sports science. And I think we've lost a little bit of that for some of these, sort of clickbait things that we see on social media. Train women as women, train girls as girls. And when you try and force that a little bit, away from the sort of sound bites, it they've not been able to describe what that means and why there would be a physiological reason to do so. So no, just adapt to the person in front of you. You said it better. You said it in 10 words. It took me 10 sentences.
Brilliant. You're an academic. That's largely the
That's
biggest
true.
thing
And
about
I'm Irish. Love to chat.
it. Brilliant. Right. So I like to. One of the things that inspire me to do an episode of the Unix Business Pod is that there'll be like a an accepted knowledge, a received wisdom, some kind of myth that everybody understands and believes in that I see a flaw in. What's the
Mhm.
biggest myth you still hear about football in women's physiology in football?
Oh, it's got to be ACL injuries. It absolutely has to. Big, big hot topic at the moment. Drives me mad. Yeah, there's a real sort of narrative at the moment. Everybody's talking about which phase of the menstrual cycle are female footballers more likely to sustain a non-contact ACL injury. And the quick answer is there isn't one. And then the slightly longer, more detailed answer, which I think is important, is that there's a disconnect between the research evidence and between what the players are telling us. So if you ask the players and the support staff around football, a lot of them will perpetuate this myth that they're going to have a non-contact ACL injury when they're menstruating, so when they've got their period, when they're bleeding. So being quite specific about that. So that's what we're hearing in sport. And then from a research evidence perspective, you're going to get a group of researchers, of scientists who are going to tell you that they're going to, girls and women are going to sustain an ACL injury just before ovulation, which is actually in the mid-cycle, not to get too technical. So overall, there are two myths out there. Neither one of them has enough evidence to show causality that one thing is causing the other. So it's sort of, it's anecdotal when we're hearing it from the players and from the staff. Yes, there is some research evidence, but actually there's as much contradictory research evidence, so there's no consensus there. So I'm calling it a zombie idea. It won't die, it won't go away. And so I actually find it really liberating to be able to go back to players, to the support staff, to mums and dads, coaches, whoever's listening, and say, there isn't a phase of the menstrual cycle that you have to fear, whichever way you're coming at it. And that, I think taking away that worry is beneficial because my worry is that it's going to become like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you've got these players who are, really apprehensive, really worried that it's going to happen to them when they've got their period. That's going to cause distraction. It's going to cause worry. They'll second guess what they're doing. They make tentative tackles. And before you know it, you've actually set up the perfect situation to sustain an injury potentially. So yeah, I think that is the big one that I would just like that to go away, to die and go away, that zombie. And just to be able to go back and say, this is not something that you have to worry about, more or less than anybody else. Yes, these injuries occur. We would love to find some reasons, to help prevent them, to lower that risk, but we're looking in the wrong place when we're thinking about menstrual cycle phase, in my opinion.
But look, a very well informed opinion.
Yeah, the research evidence is backing that, and I guess also my observations from sport as well. And to be honest, Simon, you probably know this. I work at one of the WSL clubs, and in that club, we had four ACL injuries in that women's team in one season. And I can, hand on heart say that those players were not all in the same phase of their menstrual cycle. So, even at that observational level in elite sport, we're not seeing it. And as I say, from the research evidence, the bread and butter, the day-to-day things that I do, being informed in that direction, I'm not seeing it in either camp.
Love that. Love that. My next subject matter was oddly was down to menstrual cycle and periods, and obviously the link is the ACL. So you brilliantly covered that. Anecdotally, I've worked in women's sport for 8 years. I tend to like it now more than working in male sport. I like to work with the academy, so I get some development. And my
Mm.
experience is that women's first team sport is still like this area of development because their training histories are so low. So stuff we do improves. And in first team men's football, men's sport, it just doesn't. If they listen to you at all, still might make incremental changes. So you go to bed at night going, I picked up a bunch of cones, but what else did I do? Girls' sport, you get to achieve stuff and feel good and help. And so, in a long-winded way, this is the inverse version of what we did before. My experience is that stress is a big player in injury for both genders, but
Uh-huh.
stress and fatigue is a big injury, a big risk of injury. My guess is it's got something to do with neuromuscular firing rates or something. that they break a bit slower. And I how we deal with periods. This is the next question that I want to ask in a second about monitoring menstrual cycles. How we deal with it is at the beginning of each year, we'll go through. This is what a menstrual cycle looks like. Most girls and most mums don't know,
Yeah.
which blew my mind. And giving them information on what they might feel like all the phases of the cycle. And we give them a red card, but they can play at any time just to
Okay.
say, this is the day I don't feel like training today. And
Hmm.
they're empowered to, and the coaches don't argue, they don't say a word, and they don't get to question beyond, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? That's it. And it's got nothing to do with bleeding.
Yeah.
And it's I want to give them information. And what I'm wondering is there a moment for each girl? So we're looking at we've been through the whole tracking of menstrual cycles, and then doing regular daily checks or every 3 days on their jump height, on their all of this stuff that we do. And it doesn't really correlate with any of the stuff that you're talking about from a menstrual cycle perspective. But I do believe each girl has a cycle that's unique to them. So what I see, generally, there are 4-week trends that develop with girls, but they're just at different points. So some are more powerful on week 1, some are more powerful in week 3.
Yeah.
So it's unique to them. So in a long-winded way, my point is, I wonder if it is cycle related, but only from a stress perspective, they feel sluggish that day. And it's got nothing to do with the day that people think is a period. And
Yeah.
if that's a window for them to have this delayed neuromuscular breaking issue. I don't know. That's kind of anecdotally my experience in it makes me wonder. I call it squidgy day. They get to have their squidgy days in training, and so we'll go off and not bother jumping today and not bother sprinting if they want to do that, and that's fine, and they feel better that way, and it's entirely their choice, and we'll just do other stuff. But I wonder if that's a window into their cycle when they're more susceptible to it, if there is a biological susceptibility to ACLs from that kind of stuff. Please blow me
Wow,
out of the
there's a lot to there's a lot to unpick in there. Firstly, I love the idea of a squidgy day and having, a card that you can play to just speak to the coaches to say this is not a good day for me, and that no further explanation is needed. I mean, that's really empowering. That's a great idea. I would imagine people listening to this will be stealing that idea.
the
And
red card
again,
came from the girls. The red card came from the girls, by the way, not from me.
Oh, did
They wanted
they? I
the
was going to
red
say we
card.
won't
Yeah,
read in. Yeah, we won't read too much, as you said, into the fact that it's a red card because, as you say, they can play it at any time across the cycle, and it's not red for bleeding. So, I love that idea. And actually, speaking to the wider piece, not a bad idea for boys' academies as well. Regardless of you're a boy or a girl, there are days where we don't feel 100%. And what a nice way to be able to communicate that. But yeah, let's, I guess, then go into the idea of these phase responses. Your observations are identical to our observations in sort of sport that we've seen over the last 20 years and also the published literature. There isn't a one size fits all. We have Paula Radcliffe, who set her world marathon record when she was menstruating, when she had her period. And then you might have another athlete who you see in the media and they're basically like, I lost that race because I was menstruating today. So, the complete opposite. So I think, what we would say is, medals or trophies, however you want to quantify performance, medals have been won and lost on every day of the menstrual cycle. So there really isn't universal phase responses. So we can't sort of put something out in the world that says the majority of girls and women will feel X in this phase and Y in that phase, or they'll win in this one, they'll lose in that one, they'll get injured in this one, they get injured in that one. So we don't have that universal response. It's very individualized, as you say. And I think the key is to looking for individual cyclicity. I never know if I've made up that word or if cyclicity is a thing. But what I mean by that, it's really not clever or difficult at all, is recognizing each girl's pattern. And what you might find is there's no pattern. So some of them just appear to be entirely unaffected by these hormonal changes. And again, that's terrific news because that just means brilliant. You can focus on all of the other things it means to be a footballer and your balance and your sleep and your nutrition and yada yada yada. So no pattern at all, no effects. Brilliant news. If they are affected, and I'm going to come back to, and if I don't, remind me, if they're affected, because affected means a few different things, we need to establish their cyclicity. So is it happening around the same time? And is that, as you say, week one when they're bleeding, week two, week three, week four, or so on? Because once you find out if they're affected and when they're affected, then here's a novel thing. Instead of constantly changing the training, and what we mean by that is mostly probably training a little less, doing less. Instead of that, if you know when it's happening and if it's adversity, why not look for things that mitigate that adversity? Because, these girls, women, they want to train to the best of their ability. If they're only getting access to their coach once or twice a week, they don't want to lose out on that valuable training time. So, again, maybe there's another myth, oh, let's just keep adapting the training. So I'm not saying adapting the training is bad. Absolutely, you should do that. Exactly like we said earlier, auto regulation. Somebody's not 100% change it. But rather than doing that all the time and that becoming the norm, oh gosh, we're constantly adapting training for girls and women. Why not look for cyclicity, individual cyclicity? If there isn't any, forget about it. If there is, well, if you know it's coming, do something to mitigate against that, and then they can train as normal. Now, let me rewind when I say, how are they affected? And I think this is again something that's out there that sort of gets me in a bit of a temper because I read headlines or I see on social media, this athlete is affected and girls are affected and women are affected. But there's lots of ways that you can be affected and they're not all sort of equal. So I think the first one is if you're menstruating, if you're bleeding, that could possibly affect you. So we know that some girls and women they get a little bit anxious. Will I get the chance during training to go and change my pad or my tampon? Oh, what happens if I leak into my shorts and the coach notices it? So the physical act of bleeding, and I don't really know how else to describe that, but the bleeding in and of itself might cause some worry, some distraction, some anxiety, and that could potentially affect their ability to train and compete. Because if they're going into an event a bit distracted, you're probably not getting the best out of them. So that's one way I think it can affect you. The other one, and we've sort of maybe mentioned it briefly already, is if you happen to have symptoms, some sort of adverse change in your physical or emotional state that's linked to your cycle, then, as we say, that might affect your ability to train and compete. And the solution to that is either adapt your training so that you do a little less and it's comfortable, or you know when it's coming and have an intervention and then you feel fine. Now, the third way, and here's where it comes a little sciencey, but I promise not to get bogged down in it. As a physiologist, as somebody who's working in sort of biology, physiology, I want to know if there's high estrogen. So there's lots of estrogen at one phase of the menstrual cycle circulating around the body. Is that affecting the muscle or the bone or cognition, your brain, those sort of things? So is there I don't know, what would we call it, like a biological pathway between the hormone and some physical response? And in that space and in that type of effect, that's where the research comes in. And right now, the research evidence is saying, no, we don't see consistent effects in the majority of women. So there's work still there to be done for that research evidence. But I would absolutely love for us, when we talk about our girls and women affected by their cycle, I'd love for us to be a little bit more detailed and say, affected in so much as they're affected by their bleeding, affected by their symptoms, or actually, when I know they're in a particular phase and we do counter movement jump, it seems to affect their power. And that sort of biological pathway, we're leaning into that one. So you had a lovely, yeah, your setup there and the question was lovely in lots of detail. My answer's been quite detailed, but hopefully that brings I guess a little bit more depth to, and more clarity to what we're talking about here. But let's summarize that. Not all girls and women will be affected. Let's look at the individual effect, so the cyclicity of that. if we can overcome any adversity, let's do that, whether it's adapting training or putting in some interventions to get rid of that adversity. And, let's not be heavy-handed. We don't have a blueprint for all girls and women. We don't know how power, speed, endurance is affected, if it is at all, that biological pathway. And so maybe we make our own observations with our own players
Brilliant.
as we wait for the research evidence, because I'm still busy doing that in the lab.
We so a couple of things here. We are way behind in research evidence of girls sport compared to boys sport. But I actually
Absolutely.
see this as
Hmm.
an opportunity to develop much higher quality evidence if we can, because we can be
Yes.
much more specific about actual high performance than
Hmm.
aggregate lots of data from lots of different countries and lots of different experiences. I'm not sure we're in a position to do this, other than you have a phenomenal institute in Manchester. I think we've got a bunch of, let's say, lower caliber researchers doing research from an answer first perspective than a questioning perspective. But that's just my opinion, and it's my pod, so I can.
I don't disagree with you. I think you've hit the nail on the head that, we have a really great opportunity to accelerate some learning and innovate, in girls and women's sport. So that is good. So we are behind, we all admit that, but we've got a good chance now to innovate. And I think that we do have I was going to say a mixed field, but it sounds like I'm doing a football pun. But I think that the area of research, the research area and those involved in it, I'll start by saying all well-intentioned people. There's no doubt that these are
No,
people that want to help. But we are split, the field is split at the moment, in so much as there are those of us who are bringing our curiosity and asking questions and trying to do research to answer those questions. And there are perhaps people who have got some really strong opinions and beliefs, and they're almost trying to reverse engineer some research to show those things to be true. And so it's difficult. Like, I feel bad for the players right through to the coaches to parents, because there's a lot of mixed messages out there. Because, as I say, there is this sort of slight tension in the field at the moment. So there's mixed messages going out. Like, we won't even get into the weeds of social media, and the influencers on that space, because these are not qualified people, but these are the people that live in your pocket, that, when you're waiting in a queue, you're watching them. They're very accessible. You're probably not getting the same access to a professor in a university. So yeah, so we've got some challenges in this area. And I think we've got to we've got to overcome those challenges quickly and embrace the idea that we've got this unique opportunity to accelerate and to amplify the development of girls and women's sport. So yeah, some work to be done, sort of, and merging those sectors, sport with research and academia and boring old scientists.
love that. So you said, I don't want to carry on with periods for the rest of the pod, but you said we've got to look at potential opportunities or things we can do to offset any bad day they have. And like, my feeling is, so instead of just going, right, don't train today, which we never do, that if they're having a squidgy day, they get to go and do something tactical or work on skills,
Yeah.
because I still think there's a massive training history issue just with technical skills.
Hmm.
Because we're going down women's football here. I did a quick arbitrary study on the average 16-year-old academy footballer boy has done between 11 and 14,000 hours of football, and the average girl has done about three.
Yeah,
Three.
yeah, I'm not surprised. Sadly,
That's
yeah.
but and that's quite high for academy girls as well. Because you're talking playing twice a week, and then they're not doing. So this is not formal football. This is kicking a ball around. That's the stuff that they're
Yeah.
missing. So like, there's always something that they can do. If you're feeling like they can't, what I see is what you were talking about, testing CMJ, counter movement jump for
Yeah.
powerful stuff. Well, you can just do
Hmm.
something else. You can't do a powerful thing
Yeah.
that day. But I
Yeah.
definitely see it. But I also conversely see there is usually a window of 2 or 3 days. I don't know why they that are over tracking over the course of 2 years using this is just using output, because kids, they're really,
Hmm.
it's comfortable, they're good at using it. There'll be a
Yeah.
3 day, 2 or 3 day window in the month regularly where their best peak power goes up. Don't know
They're
why.
superheroes, but we never speak about that, do we? We always want to talk about the adversity that the menstrual cycle is bringing to girls and women. But it goes back to that thing. Medals have been won on every day. There are days where girls and women feel unstoppable, like they're like superheroes. And we talk about mitigating adversity. What about leveraging, these positives? I think that's super important. And going back to where you started with that, I 100% agree. I think it should be the absolute exception to the rule to lose a training day. You've got to be in such a bad way to lose a training day for two reasons. One, as you said, because we want to bank in their training history, and we don't want them to lose out on great opportunities. And two, if you do have something, an adverse sort of physical or emotional change in your well-being associated with your cycle, you do a little exercise, you feel a little better. So, once you can physically get yourself out there doing it, once you've done it, it generally dampens that adversity. So, they'll feel better once they've done it. We know that movement is better and is actually a treatment for menstrual cycle symptoms. So like you, I agree. Let's not lose training days, unnecessarily. Let's bank their training history, because that's, again, what's going to really keep them, get them to the top of the sport or wherever it is they want to go in the sport. It doesn't always have to be to the elite end, but it will get them where they want to go, and it will keep them there for longer careers. They won't be broken. They won't have lots of stress fractures and, ACL injury, all those things, because they'll be strong and they'll be fit, and they'll have trained for the demands of their sport. And as I say, the likelihood is if they do a little bit, they'll end up going home feeling better than when they came out. So no, I think they're very important messages to put out there.
Brilliant. Movement is medicine, and
Yeah.
productivity is great for the mental health. If you do
Mhm.
some if they have a targeted skill that's planned for that day, and if you can always make it challenging, because that's the point of coaching. The If they overcome that challenge, they find intrinsic reward. They go home feeling great, and it overcomes any of that anxiety and all of that the whatever mental drama that they have going on. So all of these things are really important. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Um, right, we've crushed periods, kind of, as these things
Mhm.
go. We've kind of talked about how periods influence ACLs. It's inarguable. So I've done a whole series last year on ACLs. I did 6 pods. We had biomechanists, we had elite physio, we had Ender on to talk about traction and
Yeah.
footwear. We had an England player, a Derby County player. So you see the difference in the levels, because we talk about girls football like it's a thing. It's not.
Yeah.
It's You've got the first 4 teams in the league. They do a thing that looks like the Premier League.
Yeah.
You've got the rest of the league, which does another thing, and then you've got everybody else, which looks marginally above the dog and duck.
Mhm.
And it's important to acknowledge these things and see how we can influence to raise the standard. I see the standard is going up exponentially for the last 6 years. The worst at academy level, the worst footballer, the difference between top and bottom of the technically and athletically, the worst footballers got
Mhm.
so much smaller. But also the worst footballer now isn't just somebody that's choosing to play football. There are actual footballers.
Yeah.
And only 5 years ago, there'd be at least 5 girls on every match who just happened to have ended up being on a football pitch for
Mhm.
social reasons. And so this is a very different place that we have now. So ACLs, give me your take on. It's inarguable that the rate is significantly higher. I have lots
Mhm.
of reasons. I have lots of ideas as to why. What is yours?
Oh, there's a big question. Oh, this could set the world on fire. Do your listeners, are they able to interact with you and send you rude emails? I'm going to put my neck out there, and I'm going to say that in my opinion, of what sort of I'm seeing in this space, my best guess is it's linked to that training history, and I guess coupled with that, I don't know how you might uncouple it, but sort of a lack of sort of adequate strength and conditioning. I think that's the biggest gap for me, and I would say that that's probably the thing that's contributing most to the higher occurrence in women. But one thing I will challenge, and before we to and fro on what I've just said, what I think I would challenge is quite often people say it's 6 times higher in girls and women. Um, I am not as fixated on the six as other people. I would not argue with you. It is higher in women, but I'm not sure I'd put a number on it, and I'm certainly not sure I'd put 6 times higher. And I think that if we had, and now go back to sort of my answer, if girls and women, if that gap closed in that sort of training history, those hours that you put numbers to, if we could close that and we could support our girls and women from a strength and conditioning perspective the same way we do our boys and men, I think that that number, that rate of injury would close significantly. And I might argue with myself, I don't know, but maybe with you, maybe with the listeners, that it would almost disappear. You know, we're going to see these injuries in sports. You know, I think it was the start of last season. I was seeing on social media lots of male players getting them, but it's just not reported in the same way. I think it's become almost like a scandal, real clickbait in girls and women's sport. So it's really pushed down our throats a lot more. So that's my answer. I'm thinking that, you know, that disparity and actually a term, and now I'm coming out of my lane as a physiologist, but a term that I happened on sort of 3 4 years ago, the gendered environment. I think that speaks to this. You know, if girls were having the same training experience, history, hours, access to coaches, the same quality of the pitches, that they had boots that were designed for them, all of these things, if we change that sort of environment, I'm not too sure there's much left from a physiology perspective, a pure biology, anatomical, physiological perspective. I don't think there's much of a gap. Oh my God, that was a lot. Yeah,
I
sorry.
love that. I don't argue. I wouldn't argue that at all. I would put a couple of questions to you because
Okay.
I've covered this ad nauseum, written dozens of articles,
Yeah.
and done podcast series on it. Would we agree that most ACLs occur from some kind of the intensity of play? So if there's a fast sprint and a change of direction, or there's a jump and a land,
Yeah.
high intensity play, and if you can create the jump and a land, which takes a nudge in the air, so there's an unexpected force of landing, a different direction of landing. Yeah.
Yep, we can agree on that.
But from the sprinting perspective, if we set aside for a second gender, apart from the inarguable size difference of
Yeah.
men and female, but we play on the same size pitch. So the game demands are very, very different. And instead of looking at absolutes, if we look at relative speeds, if we look at relative intensity of speeds, I think the demands are greater in girls because the distances are longer. So they have to get up to higher speeds relative to their maximum more often or for a longer period of time. So if we add that as a truth to the fact that their training age is just less, so not just gym based, what we discussed earlier, they're just accelerating and decelerating so many fewer times in their life because they're not playing footy on the park with their mates. This builds up tolerance. And I feel like physiologically it builds up tolerance, but neurologically it builds up skill adaptations. And the skill adaptations of changing direction and braking, jumping, and landing. So I think a combination of those two things are greater than all of the other stuff. I think if we either, what we talked about off pod, if we acknowledge that these are just different sports and it's okay that they're different sports, let's reduce the pitch by 30% and reduce the goal size by 30%, and then see how those narratives change. Because the intensity would then be comparable to men's football. Also, you would then not get women's goalkeepers ridiculed for not saving the ball that's in the corner because they just can't get to it. So what's the point diving? Because it's just so much bigger. So you get those two, the narrative change, but also there's a huge physiological game demand change if you reduce the pitch by 30% and see how that impacted those things.
I mean that's super interesting. I love I love hearing something different, and nobody's ever really sort of laid it out to me in the way that you just have. I mean that is very, very interesting. I think, I wonder, and again, I'm veering off, and that's always dangerous with an Irish person thinking and talking at the same time. Who knows what will come out? I think if we did that almost as an experiment to see, as you say, what would happen, that would be super interesting. I think I don't know if culturally is the right word, but I think you're going to hit like I think there'll be so much pushback against that idea because
Yeah.
it could maybe the optics of that could look like we're saying that girls and women are less than, oh, they're smaller men, they're less than, they're not up to the challenge. And I think that there's some challenge again, going back to that sort of environment and gendered environment. I think if we could park that for a minute, all of that sort of thing, and they're, don't get me wrong, they're very important questions and very important statements and mindsets, etc. The culture is super important, but I do quite like the idea of studying if you reduce the pitch size and the goal size from a physiological point of view, what does that do? And it is this thing, isn't it? And we sort of talked about research tension and observational tension against lab tension and all these things. But there is a tension there, isn't there, between what might actually accelerate the game and the development of the game and the popularity of the game and the sustainability of the women's game versus this wider sociological, cultural, and as I say, not my wheelhouse, and all the sociologists are listening now going, they're not the right words. But can we get away from the mindset of people will just then write off women's sport and go, oh, told you they couldn't play on a full-size pitch. So yeah, how do we make all of these things work? We maximize the physiology whilst dealing with some of those other narratives. Haven't really addressed that well, but I find what you said deeply interesting. I'll be thinking about that after we finish the pod. But yeah, maybe there's a study idea in there that we can sort of take away from the wider, I guess, social commentary, because at the end of the day, people like you and I absolutely do not want girls and women's sport to look less than. And wouldn't it be such a shame if somebody took that one soundbite and made it that, when in fact, actually, it could be a really smart idea that actually develops the game, the
Yeah,
physicality of the game.
I think there is actually, without changing anything right now, I think there is an opportunity to do the study because the pitch sizes change as they get older, and the FA are changing or delaying the increase in pitch size from next year, 9 by 9,
That's
9 versus 9. They used to go 11 at 12, and now it's moving up to 14, I think.
Oh, that's interesting.
And because biology says girls grow first, that
Mhm.
will now become an interesting window.
We've just designed a really cool study, you and I. Well, you
They,
won't
so
be. I'm just jumping on the
well,
bandwagon.
but the idea is there, and we're at a time where because of the RTCs moving to ETCs and then been taken on by each of the main football clubs, like there are lots of them. So and there's a possibility of being able to control the situation with amongst ETCs. There are enough of them to get quality data from. I think if it was something to look at.
Yeah.
There's another thing, like they play on AstroTurf. So girls play on AstroTurf, and most of the time, my other take on this goes back to the stress and tiredness thing that I talked about, is the outside of the top four. So we should totally dismiss international football and the top four from any research, because that's not real. It's all it's talking about. All it's talking about is a really small set of people that live a professional life. All of the rest of them aren't professional, and they have to go work in the shop early in the day, and then they get to train after the men have finished on their training ground at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, when they're already a bit tired for a start. Just everybody's a bit tired after work, and so they get in two maybe 3 days of training late on at night. Their match days, as they go up through the leagues, they're going from training on Astro all the time to 4 times a season they'll be playing on grass, but it won't be a good quality pitch. But they're not trained for playing on grass at all. But I think the biggest player beyond the pitch size and dimensions is the quality of coaching staff. That over the last 5 years, over the last 8 years, it's gone from. I've been a sports scientist since '96. So I'm a sports scientist that does a variety of different jobs. I've got 11 different roles, and I apply my skill set to lots of different roles,
Yeah.
and they call it whatever they like. Doesn't matter. I've been called, I don't know, over the years, like the fitness guy, fitness trainer, all of these things, sports coach in tennis, whatever. Don't care. But I just apply my skills to whatever role it is.
Mhm.
And it used to be maybe at the beginning of the UKSCA around 2008, S&C became a thing. And then we started to get master's degrees in S&C, which was very nice. And you had a standard to get in. Now everybody has it. But the way the evolution of universities and I don't know, there's a slightly different standard. Depends where you went, what the course is,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
the industry's been flooded by it. So there's this whole new level of industry of jobs. People need jobs, and we've managed to create these job pathways. So maybe 8 or 10 years ago, the first job you would get would be unpaid internship, and you would be working with the youngest boys in a football club or a rugby club or a cricket club. And then 8, 7 years ago, the lowest rung of the job would be for England, one of the governing bodies, working with para sport. Worse, so that's how it works. And then it went to women, and now the lowest rung, the first entry is unpaid work experience kind of job, but you're still the head of the team working in girls' academies. So you work in girls' academies because the point is you're going to get some experience, but the goal is to be Man United's first team coach. And so you have to work in girls' academies. Maybe you get a girls' first team. From girls' first team, you'll get boys' baby academy, and you'll work your way up until you get to first team. These are all entirely different skill sets necessary to get the best of each of those cohorts of people. And we're not willing as an industry and sport to admit this. Basically, Arsenal have, and nobody else are admitting that that you need different skills. When in education, you have people, primary school teachers are totally different psychology from being a secondary school teacher to being a lecturer. And we aren't willing to concede this. And so we're getting kids running, inexperienced children, literally children, running women's football, the backroom staff. And add one layer on top of that is that boys' academies, this is working in males boys academies, they will have full-time physio at every game. And there'll be like a truck to take them if there's an injury, to take them to an ambulance if necessary, or to treatment rooms, because training grounds are big and laid out. You could be like a kilometer from training, from where they need to be. Girls have a student sports therapist at most. So you get outside the top 4 teams in the WSL. It's kind of creeping down a little bit with a little bit more money in there. You might get a first year grad being the sports therapist, but the quality of medical care is zero. If they get injured, they get nothing. And the quality of S&C, if they have some to develop some training history, it's garbage. So until we can improve that, the argument about the rates of ACL, they're just not comparable in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're speaking again, aren't we, to that environment, to the resources, to the experience, that whole piece. And what you've said is absolutely true. And, I guess the layer I'll add to that is the fact that, if a lot of these graduates, these people that we're talking about that are in the pipeline, they're coming out of some sort of sports science degree, at least to start with. It could be sport and exercise science, it could be sports science with an emphasis on strength and conditioning. But we're going to say from the sports sciences with an S there, to be plural. And, still in sports science degrees, we do not teach women's physiology at all. You might get 1, 2 lectures a year. Often, can't lie, even this year, 2025, often that will still be in a module on special populations, like half the world special population. You might get the odd lecture on, as you say, para sport, or the elderly, or all the different sort of
Kids,
populations
usually
depending
the
on.
kids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you know, so you might get the odd lecture, and it is, and maybe again somebody's listening and they'll go, well, I had more than one a year, but we can still count them. They're still a handful. They're not like every lecture that you go to across your 3 or 4 year degree or your 4 year if you add in your master's. There isn't specific mention of girls, women in each of those lectures across those 4 years. As I say, I'm going to argue that you're probably hearing it a handful of times a year as opposed to weekly and daily. And so therefore we push out graduates. They don't have a knowledge base in these female specific considerations, whether it is like we've been talking today about menstrual cycles. So really what we're talking about are ovarian hormones. So things that happen because girls and women have ovaries and men don't. But we're not talking about breast health, we're not talking about pelvic floor health. So, we're sending out a lot of graduates, maybe, or hopefully for them, into elite sport or into a sport pipeline or whatever it might be, or just into clubs, accessing young people and so on. And they don't have a knowledge base, then they don't necessarily have an experience base. And, we still, we're still looking at, situations where people are using them to, as you said, they're starting in one with the absolute idea from day one to transfer into men's sport. I'd love to see people going in at the bottom rung going, no, no, it's my aspiration to head up women's sport, not to head up men's sport. So there's lots of complexities, but exactly what you said, adding to that we're not giving them a knowledge base, adding to that their career aspiration is to transition through women's, not all, but mostly to transition through women's into men's. Why are we not making it attractive to hit that pipeline and to stay in that and to be the boss of that? And it's a hard one, and we don't have all the answers. What I will say is, I'm very open to the possibility of, I'm going to call it stealing talent, backroom staff talent from the men's game into the women's game, because, we will have a lot of practitioners who've got years and years of experience at quite a top level, and, they'll bring a lot of experience and lessons with them. Um, uh, Probably somebody's shouting at, probably many women are now shouting at me, going, "Oh, you're taking jobs away from women." No, because I think, we don't have a whole generation, and again, you could add an S on that, of very qualified, very experienced women who are ready to take on these roles. So the caveat is I welcome talent from the men's game into the women's game. The caveat is I would love to see those men then mentor, supervise, help, really accelerate the girls and women then in these pipelines so that we do see more girls and women in this. And also, I'm happy on the other side of this is that some of the girls and women who start off in women's sport can also go and work in men's sport. So I've gotten very much, so welcome to my TED talk. I've gotten very big here, for a physiologist into sort of society. But what I'm trying to say is, I completely agree with you. We've really got to look at the talent pipelines in the staffing of girls and women's sport and what that looks like and who these people are and how we train them. But as I say, I'm all on for cross-pollination, whether that's men into women's sport and the experience and knowledge they bring, women into the men's game, all of that. We're going to be better with lots of different voices in the room. But we have to do better at the university level, if that's where we see a lot of these people starting, to embed female physiology into the daily and weekly conversations, lectures, workshops, as opposed to once or twice a year. Because as long as we do that, we will have people who are not, they don't know these things, they've no mentors in these things, and it all sort of falls apart. Oh my goodness, you should have just muted me halfway through that.
I've taken half your day away, and I missed the question on contraception, the contraceptive pill, but another day. Um, one is there one thing that you can that could make a difference for a parent or a girl that's listening to this?
Oh my
What thing
goodness,
can they implement tomorrow?
that's a huge question. Um, this is not sort of sexy, clever science, but I think should be helpful is to stop being so scared by female specific considerations. Um, you know, we've become so worried by them. There's a lot of fear mongering. And if I could take that away and say, your daughters are not more likely to get injured in one phase or another. If you're the coach, to say your player is not more likely to win or lose in a particular, but particularly lose in a particular phase. And just to say that, anything, any considerations that girls and women experience that are female specific, we can mitigate that adversity, and we should be looking to talk about some of the positives and to leverage those. So I think that's my big message, not to be worried. Yes, we've gone from not looking, never considering female specific topics. We've done that, and that was wrong, taboos and in the darkness, and just pretending we're all the same. And now we've gone, I think, to the other end of the spectrum of going, oh, this is going to take over your life and it will determine whether you are healthy and injury free or whatever that is, or whether you win an Olympic medal. Can we just course correct and say, let's consider female specific things, but let's be pragmatic and sensible about them. We do have solutions there in our back pockets to deal with all of these things. And girls and women can go on to be fantastic athletes, fantastic players. And that's what it's about. It's about growing women's sport, girls and women's sport, and empowering not just the players and the athletes themselves, but all of those around it, as you nicely, and this is something I've never spoken about in a podcast before, but also empowering the staff and the culture and the environment and the organizations. And then we will have truly arrived with women's sport in a good space.
Love that. That's very big. My one take home would be a much quicker one than that. Go and find your
Of
daughter.
course.
Go and find your daughter UKSCA accredited S&C. That's it. Like, your ETC is not providing this. Go and find an external one and do it as well. If you're trained 2 or 3 times a week, you can go and get a private S&C, and they will improve your daughter's capacities, abilities, and potential for a career in of maximizing her performance in sport. Jump higher, run faster, break quicker, all of the good stuff, and they will feel better from being stronger. They just do. I've never met a single girl in my entire life I've trained with that didn't appreciate how they felt after lifting weights.
Amen to that. What you said, that was quite snappy. I wish I'd said that. But no, I
There you
think,
go, Kirsty.
we're coming from
Thank
the
you so
same
much for
point
your
of
time. You've
view.
been amazing.
Oh, thank
Are there
you.
any resources that they can that you know of that are quick websites they can go and grab information from? If not, I will put some together.
Yeah, I might lean on you to put some together. And sadly at the minute there's a lot of misinformation out there. So rather than pointing you in the direction of resources, I would say to parents, to players, to those who are easily influenced, ditch the social media when it comes to this type of thing. You are only going to find misinformation there. I think off the top of my head, the Australian Institute of Sport, there's a random, possibly feels like a random signpost, but they have a lovely website with a huge section dedicated to female athletes with some nice learning modules, that sort of thing on there. If I had to choose one, that would be the one.
Brilliant. I will put links to the series I did, which have 5 different articles on each of the pods, which quote you and your research and the Aussie Institute in as well. So brilliant.
Fantastic.
Works perfectly. Thank you very much for your time.
You are so welcome.